how am I going to pick a subject? And I thought, I know what, I'll go and have a look at all the good academic papers that are being submitted recently, and I'll just take some subject matter from one of those, and it'll be all nice and it'll be topical and new. The problem is, as you can see here, this is an online website where people who write academic papers for submission can upload them and tell the world about them. And currently it's about 12,000 a month, and I would say about a third of those are for machine translation. So, beginning to troll through that lot just wasn't going to be an exercise worthwhile. So then I thought, okay, I do a lot of stuff with technology. I'm genetically lazy, so I'll use some things that I know about, such as ADAPT's Yodel. ADAPT are a research centre based here in Dublin that we have been academic partners with since they formed. And they have this nice little gizmo where you say, I want to talk about this topic, this is how long I've got, and build me a PowerPoint framework. So that would be a good way to start. Then I could use some content generation technology to build a few graphs, do some layout for me. And then, just so as I could be inclusive to everybody in the audience, I could use Microsoft's presentation translator to live subtitle and translate my presentation into any one of 30-odd languages. And I thought, hey, it would be really good. But again, there's a lot of time involved in installing applications and doing all kinds of things there. So then we come to the Coca-Cola topic du jour. Artificial intelligence. Let's talk about AI and how you can use it within localization. And we have done some forays into some of these topics, particularly the lights out project management and quality estimation. But again, it gets a bit repetitive, and you probably have to go quite deep in order to get anything out of it. So I'm really wondering what to do at this stage, and Aoife gave me some sage advice, which was, just give people some snippets of information that they can take away and kind of follow up on their own as being interesting. So I'm going to try and whiz through the last kind of 6 to 9 months of things that I've been dabbling in and places that I've been, and give you some things that you can take away and look up by yourselves. CSA, Common Sense Advisory. These guys are, in my opinion, really kind of getting on the ball recently. They did a presentation last week in London called the Translator's Jetpack. If you get a chance to look at it or listen to it, I would recommend it. It's very topical, and the presentation itself is very good. But right now CSA have this thing that they're calling the augmented translator, as being a way of putting translators central to the process again, because we have TMSs and we have AI and we have all these techniques which process information to death, and then the translator sitting there saying, this is great, but I still have no context. I have all this stuff coming at me, and I can't do the pure job that I'm hired to do. So they're kind of have these kind of subtopics of that. Lights out project management is this notion that you create and assign jobs and distribute them and monitor them without kind of any humans at all. Carlos has just finished upgrading our lights out project management, so you can chat to him about how we did that. We have adaptive machine translation. If you've not seen that, it's very interesting. We did an evaluation of it. Think of it as predictive text meets dynamic translation. So as I type my sentence in Spanish that I'm translating, a machine automatically retranslates what it thinks the rest of the sentence should be. And that's, in my mind, going to kind of transform the translator experience. So rather than just hopping around editing bits of a sentence, you can actually be much more fluid about how you do it. Neural machine translation we'll talk about a bit more advanced, and then something else that we also did a foray into with our product that we call Deep Content is automatic content enrichment. So this is kind of the equivalent that Soapbox were talking about, where you can take text and you can analyze it for all kinds of grammatical and syntactical information, and use that then to annotate the document. So I can pick out people, places, objects in that sentence. I can go and automatically look up terminology, or I can have my workflow system take actions on bits of text that it sees. And we integrated that into our open source editor called Oslo. So CSA, I would recommend that, like I say, they're doing some interesting stuff right now. By the way, I'm not getting any commission from any of the things that I'm talking about today, unfortunately. Machine translation, my God. This is the situation that we have now. So customers come to us and say, we want to use machine translation. And we say, which of the 27 systems would you like to use? And they say, well, why don't you give us, a comparative analysis of all of them for 26 language pairs, and then we'll decide. Truthfully, that is kind of the situation that we're in. Fortunately, we have, not for all of these systems, but for many of them, a way of concurrently testing translations, so that's kind of helpful. But there is a realization that, even for the same content type, but for different language pairs, different systems perform better than others. And now we have, for Microsoft and Google, they have 3 different flavors of MT that you can use as well. A good organization to look out for, a company called Intento. I think they're an academic organization, but they may have switched to being commercial. But they published a lot of blog posts and reports on comparative analyses of not only machine translation but also machine learning. So they will publish stats on, how does Google's NMT match up against Microsoft's NMT for certain language pairs. So they're good to, if you're trying to get into that space, it's kind of a good idea, a good heads up as to which ones are performing quite well. And they do change very frequently as well. And then they also are quite heavy into talking about different evaluation metrics, because the way that people have evaluated machine translation for the last 20 years actually isn't good for neural machine translation, because the characteristics of what they're trying to analyze are different for both outputs. The other favorite, machine learning. We've been spending a lot of time with this just because it just turns out that machine learning is applicable in so many different domains. Data is one of the issues that we have there, just trying to get enough data to model a particular scenario. The other thing that's kind of hard for us is, my developer, it's a bit like me saying to a developer, I want you to go and investigate this topic called machine learning, but I need you to learn German first before you can even start to access it. We have to change from the traditional frameworks that we're using in programming languages to a completely different set. And usually there's a whole set of different concepts that go with that as well. So I'll talk about how we've tried to address that impedance to being able to access these kinds of things. But I think, the good thing is that more and more of these services are more and more of these techniques are being exposed as services. So particularly Google and Microsoft's Azure, you can somewhat access these things, and they have kind of templates. So if you want to model a particular scenario, if you have your own data, it's a bit like building an MT system. You can do that relatively easily. Although I have to say, it doesn't fit my kind of instantaneous gratification. One of the reasons I got into computing was that I liked things happening fast and seeing the results. And these things can take days or weeks to train. This is an interesting one because you kind of think it's boring, connectivity and interoperability, but actually it's still very important, particularly now as we want to have more and more scenarios where machines talk to each other. Gala have been working for about the last year, I think, on their what they call the translation API. We're part of that initiative. And our contribution is that we've open sourced something called JLIF. You've heard of XLIF, which is kind of format for moving translations between systems. One of the difficulties with that is it's traditionally been XML, which when you're doing machine-to-machine communication is not always supported. So JLIF is again, it's an open standard because we're very kind of committed to those. But to make it easy for people to create and convert from the old format to the new format, we wrote some software, and that's open source up on GitHub if you want to go and have a look at it. One thing that's also very interesting is a new company on the block called Zilio. If people remember a company called Clay Tablet that were acquired, Zilio are kind of a bit like that. They have a whole bunch of connectors that you can install, and then when you want to talk to a content management system, you just talk to their one system, and it does the translation, if you like. So that's a good one to look out for. And they're also part of a trend that seems to be happening with people coming into the industry from outside of the industry. I think there's people are seeing our space as an opportunity to grow and have new products. Yeah, so I think that's very important. Particularly as the proliferation of things that we want to connect up, it's actually an interesting topic. Long-tail languages, as Tom alluded to earlier, this is something that we get asked about a lot these days. Can you provide us with translations into this dialect? If you thought Unicode was just about, academics sitting down and encoding each little character in the world, then you would be wrong. They actually do a huge amount of work these days on what's called the Common Language Data Repository. And that's actually a really good resource if you're looking to go into a region and you want to know what kinds of things you have to support, because they basically have collated for just about every region in the world all of the conventions, not just things like date formats and number formats, but they have things like how you should construct addresses and people's names and how you articulate plural forms, so that it's actually a very good general resource for understanding different languages. And they also publish a programming framework that's been around for a while called ICU, and I think probably all the major operating systems in the world are based upon that these days. I was at Unicode again last year, that really interesting, and they added like 600 new languages in the last version. I mean, I had never heard of pretty much all of them, but interesting stories where one guy actually was doing work in a remote African region, and these people had no real digital presence because their character set wasn't supported anywhere. So this chap, who was an academic, actually collected together and made a submission to Unicode for these people's character set. Once Unicode adopted the character set, they then went to Google and asked whether they'd support it in Android. And these people, they don't really have hardwire networks anyway. They're mobile kind of first. And this guy was able to get these people online, within a couple of years, which is quite astounding, really, from somebody who has no digital presence at all. So I thought that was quite cool. Snackable content. The scene is big in this space, and I'm one of those people that sits in meetings, looking at the content in with the sound off and subtitles on. So we get asked about this a lot. We have our own snackable content in-house now, which I'll talk about. We have these, what we call bite-sized learning, and we quite often record those, and they're quite good. I was trying to avoid talking about this. The B word is blockchain, and yeah, I actually don't have an opinion about this right now. We had two people at the last House conference talking about it. The notion of being able to track data, I get that bit. The whole business of it being linked to money, I'm not quite sure I follow that one. And we already have things like the Taos data community where people can submit translation memories and you can share them with other people. So I'm not quite sure how this fits into that scenario. And this notion of provenance, what you might feel is a very valuable, highly curated data set. Somebody else might not think the same thing. So I'm not quite sure where this is going to sit, but I definitely have to keep an open mind about these things. So we have what I would call the watching brief on this one right now. The company that we're at Taos are called Xfluency, but as I say, the one thing I could gather about them right now was that they were wanting to, they wanted a lot of investment, so that might not be a good sign. I mentioned this, people are definitely coming in from outside the industry, not just in terms of venture capital people, but I've noticed a lot of project managers and techie people coming in from outside the industry. And I have to say, one of the things as a technical person that kind of got me about 5 to 10 years ago was I was watching something on TV about how they were making very high quality silk ties with machines, and ever since then it's just bewildered me that we still have a lot of debate about producing good translations. So that's been one of my driving visions. So this is definitely how I feel on, usually on a Friday or a Monday morning. And how do we get over that? Well, to be honest, it is back to basics with education. Again, I'm not on commission with any of these systems, but within my team and within a lot of the teams within Vistatec, we actually make learning new subjects and skills part of your annual objectives. Certainly I expect my team to get through about one course a quarter, and it not only keeps people motivated, but a lot of these systems you can do kind of as background tasks, and I really would encourage people to be kind of lifelong learners. It's really interesting. Again, you can talk to Carlos about that, but I take a lot of these myself, and it does prepare you for things coming along, because certainly if you stay there, you're just going to get run over. So a quick infomercial. I think when you interact with us, you get more than kind of a translation company. We're very and these are things that we've gotten from our customer surveys. People do think that we're kind of technically competent, thank God. Otherwise I wouldn't be standing here, I'm sure. We do have a lot of strong principles about the best way of doing localization, but at the same time we don't have any sacred cows. So, we're not going to stand in the way of a particular idea just on the basis that we don't want to do it. We have track records with some very large companies that we've done integrations and things with, and I think we have a good ability to you know, get the rubber on the tarmac. We do a lot of wider activities as well in terms of pure R&D. So I mentioned the Adapt Centre that we've been members of for you know, a good 10 years. And these things are useful because we are a private organisation, so we want to leverage you know, thought leadership where we can, and Adapt have a number of world-class academics and researchers, and they help us with the things like machine learning that, you know, we probably couldn't invest totally with ourselves. And we're big into, as I say, the open standards. So the OASIS look after a lot of localization standards, and we sit not only on the technical committees, but as I say, we've open sourced toolkits that are built around those standards as well. And you know, I think that brings us back to why we're here, because the way that you make progress is in getting out, and this is my argument for Tom, is getting out of the office and talking to other people and finding out what, you know, the general experience is, or what the new ideas are. And we hope that that's what you get out of today, is talking to people who are, you know, on the front line, maybe a different front line, but they, you know, they have their own challenges, and pick up new ideas. Thank you.